let me introduce you guys to our guest, Mr. Leo. Mr. Leo, or Van, is a senior at Yale and US College. He's previously worked at companies such as Bank of America and the Pola in New York. He loves creating websites and little projects in his spare time, and will be joining Credit Suisse, if that's how you pronounce it, as a software engineer upon graduation. So yeah, welcome, dude.
Yes, I'll be joining Credit Suisse as a software engineer upon graduation, and I'm a computer science major. But I didn't always intend to be a computer science major actually. So I actually started out thinking I'll do a major in the humanities, something like anthropology, literature, because that was what I always did growing up. And I really only started coding in university itself, and so that's where I discovered like, oh, maybe this is something that like I may want to do. I was told I was supposed to prepare some slides, but I don't really have much to share, so I would just share what I've got. Let me just try to figure this out. Oh, okay, it appears I can't share slides due to some system permissions. But yeah, so I'll just briefly run through informally, like, I guess my background, and you guys can just ask me any questions about what I have. So I guess software engineering is a bit of a broad term, generally. So when you hear about software engineers, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of like large companies like Google, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and you feel like, oh, like there's a huge amount of software engineers, right? And I guess the second question would probably be then what do software engineers actually do? And the surprising thing is that it's actually a very non-technical degree job with a very technical requirement. Because a lot of what we do at our core is we're trying to solve problems for people. We're trying to figure out what problems exist. We're trying to talk to customers, talk to internal stakeholders, or whoever they were sort of like dealing with all these problems with. And from there, we're sort of trying to come up with solutions for them. And a lot of times, what you find yourself actually doing is you end up finding yourself working with people who are not software engineers. They might be either your managers, people from other departments. And a big part of our job is learning to deal with those different levels of complexity. Technical, I can talk about all the different niche, like things about the libraries, how like you should consider things like performance, you should consider things like compatibility, scalability. But if you are, I guess, talking to someone from sales or marketing, then a big thing here is, oh, like what are the problems you're facing on an abstract level, right? And from those abstract levels, how can we sort of bridge those gaps and explain them without going to the nitty-gritty details? So that's kind of what software engineering is. There are a lot of subdivisions within there. There's front-end engineering, which is building websites and sort of interfaces and really trying to build interfaces that are intuitive for users. There's back-end engineering, where you basically try to build servers and you allocate all these different sort of resources and you handle infrastructure among other things, right? And that's kind of, I guess, on a broad over scale, like the two main things that you would be doing, like at least positioning. So you see front end, back end, and full stack, which is where I normally am. So I do front end and back. And I found that that gives me a good sort of grasp on what's happening across the stack. So I guess that's sort of what software engineering is. And so I think maybe now I can share a bit about how I got into it. So like what I said originally, I was actually a humanities major from the start. And when I applied to college, I thought I'd do anthropology, philosophy, or PPE, politics, philosophy, and economics within humanities. And I was so set on it that at some point in my first year summer in university, I actually went to summer school for economics at Yale to study, and I did a lot of research and everything. And I think in my second year, my first semester, someone told me about this course called Introduction to Computer Science. And I thought it was fun to do. I thought I'll give it a try. And to be really honest, like I didn't really know what I'd get out of it because it was taught in a very obscure language called OCaml. So I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with programming languages, but you have your very familiar, popular ones like Python, JavaScript, and I guess C++ if you guys have heard of it. And these are what's called imperative languages, where things happen all over the place. They're not very functions are sort of defined and interact with globally defined variables. But OCaml is a functional language. So when you think about functional languages, it's really about things like math, where you try to take things that you want your program to do, and you try to mirror that of math as much as possible. Where you have inputs that will map to output. It's a one-to-one mapping essentially. Um, Let me know if anything I say doesn't make sense, because I understand a lot of the terminology I'm saying might be unfamiliar. So I'm happy to explain anything along this point if you guys don't understand. But so basically, yeah, so I did intro to computer science. And along the way, I applied for what's called the NUS Overseas College program. And that gave me the chance to go to New York to work for a startup. And so I was halfway through my introduction to computer science class, and all of a sudden I was supposed to interview for software engineering positions and compete against others who have been doing this for 2 years. Right? And I was like terrified. Like all I knew was how to like allocate memory, allocate space in an array. And like all of a sudden they were like, oh, you gotta compete against these other like computer science students who have been fighting for like a solid 2 years, doing like this day in, day out and every single thing. And so what I did is I was just super persistent. I emailed the guy every single like after we had the call, I followed up with him. I sent him like 6 emails following up and really showing him that I really care about the feedback he shared. I took the time and effort to talk even to previous interns that worked at the company. And I think I was just so clingy and so persistent that at the end they decided to take a chance on me. And that's how I got the chance to move to New York to work for a startup called The Loop. And The Loop was a really interesting place because what they did is they were a startup that targeted financial institutions. And so what they did is one of the biggest problems of financial institutions was that it's very difficult to put together raw information. I'm not sure how many of you guys have seen financial filings, but they're often very, very dense. And because companies have different reporting structures, regulations change all the time, you don't always have a consistent way of reporting your numbers. You have your typical three big balance sheet, you have your balance sheets, you have your other two, which I can't remember. But these things change and the categories we them sort of evolve over time too. And so putting them together is a very labor intensive task. And every time companies drop filings every quarter, essentially you need to redo the whole thing all over again. So what the Looper offered was a software as a service. They use machine learning and AI and basically to help to automate a lot of this process. And within 24 hours of companies dropping their new filings, they can link all the information together for you. And that was quite a big thing. For me, that was the first time I actually did any software engineering, where day in, day out, every single day, I was just coding, building websites, and I was just thrown into the deep. Um, every single day, like I just had so many things I was learning. But it was during this process that I realized like, oh, it's actually pretty fun. Because for the first time I saw like how you could sort of put together all these different concepts. You had a server, you had like different parts of your website running in parallel, and you tried to make them run and you tried to optimize it. And you had it's sort of like when you're a kid and you play with Lego, all these different sort of like components. And you get to see how they interlock with one another. You optimize them and you build on them and you try to make them do some things. And you have all these building blocks and you can do literally anything that your mind dreams about. And that really lit a spark in me. And that's why I continued. When I came back from New York, I continued working on computer science. And I just really liked it. And I continued working on it. And I think um, that just gave me the confidence to take on a lot of different opportunities. And so one of the biggest things that I did on my own, apart from my internships at Bank of America, was that I actually built a website for my school for students to look at all the information that basically is out there for courses. Who's the professor? What's the workload? What would the timetable look like? What's the syllabus that you could have? And basically, you could see like courses for the semester, courses that were offered like all throughout the years. And that was really challenging for me because for the first time, like I only knew how to code like a website using HTML and CSS, and now like I was pushing myself to do like to build a server, build a database, to build a Python script that would crawl, hit all the internal APIs from all the universities, like internal systems, compile the information together, serve it up, filter the information. And I spent I think a good 1 year doing it, and I think it's just been a fantastic journey for me. But I think a big part of it has just been really being proactive and reaching out for opportunities that I've always felt slightly unqualified for, and just really trying to do the best I can, trying to say yes and try to figure out how to do it later. Of course, I'm not saying you should say yes to everything and like never deliver. But you just try. I think for me, what helped was saying yes to opportunities that were challenging and interesting to me, and then from there trying to develop and grow as a software engineer. So with that, I think that's roughly my backstory. And after graduation, I've got an offer from Credit Suisse to join them as a software engineer, and so that's what I'll be doing. I think I'll be doing that quite a while.
In that case, I think I have some questions for you, Ivan. So what's a typical workday like for you as a software engineer? Like how busy is it and like how rigorous are the hours?
So I think generally as a software engineer, you get a lot of autonomy. So you don't really have a lot of meetings at a junior level. So what your normal day starts with is that you would always start the day by reporting, say like what you plan to do for the day. So for some teams that I work with, this is just a simple message in Slack. For others, it's a actual physical meeting where every day in the morning you just call in for 15 minutes. And then you have to report what you're doing, what you did yesterday and whatnot. Right. So that normally is how we start the day. After that, you are basically given autonomy to do whatever you want for the rest of the day, as long as you clear your tickets. because I think a big part of software engineering is that you need to spend a lot of time debugging and working with issues. And then once in a while, intermittently, you might have calls or meetings with your manager, supervisor, other people that you're working with. But typically, you have a lot of autonomy to allocate your time as you sort of deem fit. And I think this to a large degree, it's just the nature of the job. Like a lot of the problems that you need to solve require a lot of time to think, consider, and work through. And if you have problems, you can always ping and sort of reach out to different people to ask for help. Yeah. If you're asking about unless you're asking about how it's like as a computer science student, I'm also happy to share about that too. Yeah.
Well, no, I think that's fine. Like the workday as a software engineer. Another question I want to ask is, like, what do you think is the best part of your job, and how does it translate into your everyday life?
Yeah, sure. I think the best part of my job is that it's actually fun. Like I genuinely enjoy what I do. And I think that's something that I think that's the best part of my job because I think what I enjoy doing for fun, among a lot of other things, is also what I get paid to do. Because I think like there are a lot of things you enjoy that you're good at that you might not be able to monetize. For example, like I love reading books, but no one's gonna pay me to write a book with you. But I like that I get paid to explore, run different experiments, try different ways to build products. And literally like that's I think you get like all these interesting and new tools to work with all the time. Like I think one of the largest and just craziest parts about being a software engineer is that you can quite literally download and play with the same tools that professional software engineers at like Apple, Facebook, Microsoft are using it right now. But I mean, there are a few exceptions. Like you can't play with like certain systems that are using like distributed software like Kafka, or you can't use like very niche tools like Z3, which I use to solve like complex mathematical proofs. But you can basically play with almost anything else. And these libraries and these ideas are just constantly evolving. You just have so many tools and things to experiment with them. I think that's really what I enjoy the most about my job. Yeah.
I see. It's so. What are some of the biggest challenges you've encountered in your career as a software engineer, and how have you overcome it?
So I think for me there have been I think two main problems. So I think the first one is always this idea of the inferiority complex. So like what I mentioned, like I started as a humanities major. I only decided to do software engineering or computer science in my second year. And I really started doing it a lot later than my peers. And so like for me, what that meant is that when I actually started applying for my first internships, my first jobs, a lot of my peers that I was competing with or talking or basically like working with were a lot more advanced than me. Like they were much more like equipped with like a lot of the programming skills. They have taken like programming courses for like 2 years, 3 years, and really had gone in depth in certain aspects. And so for me, like that really manifested as a real sort of like challenge in trying to match up because when you ask, it's something that employers might actually ask you. Like, oh, you don't have this degree of like experience in operating systems, you don't have this degree of experience in this. And I think the way that I just managed to overcome that was by really putting in extra effort, talking to more people, and really realizing that my own humanities background was a huge benefit into itself because I was able to talk to people, understand what their needs were, explain a lot of difficult concepts, and explain and basically try to. I think the best way I think about it, so I'd be like a helicopter. So I think like because of my humanities background, I can operate at different levels of complexity, very technical levels and very abstract levels. I think that's something that has helped to compensate. And now because I sort of made up for it, really sort of um, improve on, I guess, help me do my job better. And I think that's something that I never realized when I first started out doing computer science. Oh, I was always worried that like I'm a humanities student, like I'm not able to match up to some of these computer science students, right? I think the second thing is just the sheer difficulty of the job. A lot of times, the libraries you're working with, the things you're doing, the programs you're writing, are using code that's been written by like hundreds of thousands of people over the last like 30 years or 40 years, right? And what that means is that a lot of times when you're actually working with code, the the errors you'll be facing, the problems you'll be facing, are just so difficult to debug sometimes that you just might not really understand what you mean. Right? Like you just write like 4 lines, you press enter, run the code, and suddenly you see like 15 errors pop up on the screen. And you might not know what that is. And it's always difficult because you are spending, I guess, 5, 10, 20 hours sitting there at the computer trying to slowly work through and fix these things. But it's also part of the, I think, it's something that you get better at. It's definitely a very difficult challenge, but it's something that you get better at over time by being patient and learning to test different hypotheses on what you think could be wrong with the program. Is it the syntax you're using the right? Is it the logic that you're using to evaluate the program? Is it certain problems with the library? Is it the way you set it up? Like eventually you sort of grow as a software engineer by being able to deal with these more complex problems and recognizing them. But I think these are the main two challenges that I faced. Yeah. I think there are two questions, one from Norbert and one from Edmund. Which one do I take first, Raymond?
Oh, I think let's take Norbert first.
As a
Um,
programmer, um, how often do you use the command line?
actually. So I think something you'll find out basically once you start programming enough is that it's much more efficient to use the command line to do like most operations than I guess using like generic like graphical interfaces. So for example, like if you guys wanna I guess run your code and everything, it's you can just type it within like 3 seconds and like get it out on the command line. So it's really something that you learn to use and get used to slowly using eventually over time. Yeah, it's pretty fun because you can do a lot of incredible things with a command line that you wouldn't be able to do it like graphical interfaces. You can really customize a lot of those commands over time. Yeah, I guess you had a second question, which is what code editor do I use? So I use VS Code because I like the fact that it's easy to customize to whatever needs there are. So for those of you who are sort of not very familiar with graphical, with sort of code editors, typically there are a few different sort of editors that you can use in programming. The first is generic text editors. So I'm sure you guys have seen like Notepad. It's really just an editor for you to edit text, right? You have integrated development environments, which are built with a very modern sort of tooling in mind. So you have like it's those you would see, for example, like Atom, VS Code. These are examples of them. And what they offer is a lot of functionality to make your life as a programmer easier. So you open these editors, you can see like all your files on one side. You have like buttons you can click to sort of run like all the commands easily, all your tests. And then you have like those are somewhere in the middle, and those are sort of like command line editors. Those are Emacs and Vim, and those are very customizable to what you want. I personally find that VS Code does the job for me. I just need to edit the code and run my tests. But I know a lot of people that basically are quite into Emacs and they spend hours just customizing the commands and all these different things just so it can fit like specific niche cases or needs that they have. Yeah. Does that answer your question, Norbert?
Yeah.
Cool, cool, cool. So I guess then we can move on to Edmund's question. Do you have any advice for students who want to pursue computer science in university? I think you should just do it. Like, in the sense, I think you should try it out and see if it's for you. Because I think even if you don't end up doing computer science, I think you should always experiment and learn to code. That's what I think you should start with. Because knowing how to code, learning how to automate certain things is always a useful skill. But whether or not you want to pursue computer science or not, I think it really depends on what makes you happy. Like I think for me, like I personally find a lot of joy in building products, reading about technical stuff, and trying to see like how I can do like different things the same way. And I think that's really come about because I put in a lot of time into programming and developed like sort of like a skill set that's enabled me to enjoy it to that degree, right? And so, but for other people, they might not really enjoy like the whole like experience of programming. Like I know a lot of friends who like really just don't enjoy it, right? But they know how to code. And so what you might want to do instead is you may, if those don't work out for you, then you might want to pursue like other jobs, right? Actually, let me rephrase that. Okay. Uh, okay. So I think let me just say that again in another way. So I think if you want to pursue computer science in university, there are a few different things you can do. I think you should find a way to consistently be coding and basically find a way to consistently practice code because the only way you get better at programming is essentially by practicing, right? And that is probably the best thing you want to do if you want to do computer science and then go into industry. Because a big part of like industry is really having a familiarity with, I guess, like the libraries that are being used, the sort of problems that are being faced, and the sort of niche the things that I want you to do. So that would be things like website design, all these like doing servers and all these things, right? But that's not really the best advice if you want to do, say, theoretical CS. because theoretical computer science is very different from industry computer science to some degree. A big part of theoretical computer science is basically going to be you trying to prove certain theorems, writing out proofs, finding ways to work on very niche research problems. And so if that's the area that you like to go for instead, then my advice for you would be to not only start coding, but find ways to get actively involved in research with professors early on. Because it's very difficult to really understand basically what cutting edge research is without someone to guide you and show you like the path. And so the best way for you to get involved in, I guess, if you know that you want to go do like a PhD or a master's, is you want to get started on research early. But if you're like me and you just enjoy building things with code, trying to see like what they're like, trying to see like what you can get out of it, then I'd say just start programming early, find things that you enjoy building, and just keep working on it. And in the event that I guess you find that you don't enjoy programming or computer science is not for you halfway, you've at least learned a valuable skill. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. I'm happy to elaborate on this. Yeah. Should I reply Chara's or Norbert's?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine.
So
Hi,
who do you want me to?
am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, so my question is, which programming language do you think would be most applicable in the future of digital business?
Digital business.
Sorry?
What do you mean by digital business? Like,
I'm thinking like maybe apps, digital banking, things like Tokopedia, etc.
I think it depends on which part of digital business you're looking at. I think to be really honest, if you learn like Python and JavaScript, you can probably be involved in like most aspects of the stack. So if you know JavaScript, you can essentially help build like Tokopedia's like website. You can build like the servers because JavaScript can be used like on the website, on the server, and for most things. Right? If you're interested in doing data science, for example, then 100% Python. Like for my current final year thesis, which is machine learning based, you find that a lot of it's written in Python nowadays because it's very easy to write. You can develop a prototype really fast. So I'd say that honestly, you want to just learn Python and JavaScript. If I'm not sure if your interest is this, but if your interest is in infrastructure and trying to really work on a very high performance code, you need to learn C++. So for example, companies that really want to use that are, I have a friend, for example, working at ByteDance, which is a company behind TikTok. And so for them, if you want to work in the infrastructure team, you need to know C++ because they need to ensure there's very low latency, services that operate very fast, that operate well. Yeah. So that's basically, so to sum it up in short, I would just recommend Python first and then JavaScript. Yeah.
Okay, so C++, JavaScript, and Python. Okay, got it. Thank you.
No problem. Happy to help. Yeah. So I think Rohan had another question. Did your first experience with programming just click, or did you develop interest in it over time? So I think I actually didn't like programming that much when I first did it, because my first programming language was R. I found it very difficult and unintuitive. For me, what really clicked was when I did Introduction to Computer Science, and every single week I was working on these incredibly difficult problem sets. And I was just, like I think every single week, me and my friends, we would book a classroom, we would sit down, and we'd try to just hammer it out, right? Even over like the break, because there was just so much work that was being given to us, we were just working on it. And I think at some point we just realized that, we're working on this on Friday night, we're still having some degree of fun. I mean, of course, it was challenging. Like, it was not, it's not like all fun and games and all, but we were having fun. Like we genuinely enjoyed the challenge that it gave us. And it felt like you were just like learning all these like crazy things that you would never think of, like the algorithms that were being used, the ways that you were structuring data and all these different things. It was just so fun for us. And I think over time, that's when it clicked. It was over a gradual period of time, once we developed a certain level of expertise, and we could actually do whatever we wanted or do a certain amount of things with the programming language, that we realized that, oh, this is pretty fun. That's when I liked it. So I think that's why for me, I feel that if you don't like programming at the start, you should probably give it some time. Try to build a website, try to build a server, try to see like if you can do some data science if that's what you're into. And then after you tried it out and really given it some time, and you really don't like it, then I think you can definitively conclude that it's not for you. But I mean, yeah, I think you know yourself best. Yeah. Yeah, I think then there's a question from like Norbert. How many programming languages should we learn? And so forth. So I think in terms of programming languages, I think you should just learn whatever you need. Um, I think honestly, you can just do with Python and JavaScript for most cases, because most programming jobs just will ask you to code up algorithms in Python. If you're applying for hedge funds, then it'll be C++ for sure, no questions asked. But JavaScript is also used. So as long as you know Python, JavaScript, C++, I think you're pretty much good to go for most cases. Different companies might require you to know specific languages. So for example, at Bank of America, we use Scala at and but that's a very like niche case, and it's very deliberate choice. Most of the time, what you find is that once you've learned one programming language well, you can essentially pick up the others really fast, because what you're looking for after that is not, it's just learning the syntax. Because what you want to learn from your first programming language are ways to think about problems. How do you deconstruct them? How do you think about them in abstract and repeatable ways, right? I think there's always an example, which is like how do you make a peanut butter sandwich, right? For most people, it would be, oh, like just make a peanut butter sandwich, right? But for programmers, like at least when they try to teach it to kids, they're always like, oh, first you gotta take the bread out, you gotta take 2 pieces of bread, put it on the plate, right? Take the knife, put it inside the jar, like spread it, then put the piece of bread together, and that's a peanut butter sandwich. Right? And your goal is really to try to learn to think about problems and to break them down in very clear and abstract steps. Because the programming languages that you're using, machines will execute whatever you write. It will do whatever you ask, but not a step more and not a step less. But it will do it an infinite number of times as long as you tell it to do so. Once you manage to learn how to do that in one programming language, you can do it in any programming language. It's just learning how to write it, sort of. Yeah. And I guess in response to your second question, I am currently using PyTorch. Yeah. I'm happy to talk about my current machine learning thesis if that's something you want to hear about. Or anything else related to software engineering. Yeah.
Okay, wait. I think since all the Q&A questions ran out, I think I'll just ask my own questions. I have a really debatable question. So, do you think that someone needs a CS degree to be a good software engineer and work at one of the best companies? Because like I know a lot of people who like don't go to uni, but they end up getting software engineers through self-learning processes.
Then you don't need to go to university to be a software engineer. I think that's definitely been proven by, I guess, like on an anecdotal level, because a lot of companies do hire self-taught developers. And just because there's such a big lack of developers in general in the market, like it's self-taught developers are not really at that big a disadvantage, in my honest opinion, after the first or second job. Like I know some people who've been looking for like to hire developers, and it's like been like 6 months to 1 year. Like it's a genuinely difficult thing to do now. And so I guess the question might be, why go to university to do computer science, right? I guess it's a follow-up. And I think if that's the second question that you're thinking about, I think going to university for computer science gives you a certain degree of structure, and it gives you a way to approach computer science, which I think is a bit more fundamental, which is to really try to approach it from a very abstract level, where you sit down and you try to look at it and you try to really like understand it from a very mathematical and theoretical point of view. Do you need that for actual software engineering? Not so much. In my honest opinion, I think it's honestly not that necessary. But if you're interested in theoretical computer science, and if you're interested in doing, I guess, like master's or graduate level, you definitely need that, because the amount of mathematical intuition that you'll need, the amount of background that you need, I think it's very difficult to find out of the university. But with all the information that's available online nowadays, I think it's very doable for someone to transition to software engineering. Yeah, without having gone to the university.
Yeah. I think we could take Vinuja's question. Yeah.
Yeah. So may I know which language do you use now for software engineering? I mean, not just coding to solve problems or algorithms, but the actual coding language that you use for software engineering, like the main one.
Sure, sure, no problem. I think it depends on what I'm doing. So for the website, if I'm building the website that you see and interact with, I'm using JavaScript. If I'm building the server that is interact that the website's interacting with, I'm also using JavaScript. The crawler that's the Python script that's working the script that runs and hits all the internal APIs, collates the information, loads it in. That's in Python. The how the server calls the database and works with it, that's in SQL. Um, so I think it really depends on what you're using for, but generally I'm using Python and JavaScript, and that's basically what I'm doing for most of my projects nowadays. Because I find that I think for me what I value is being able to prototype and build things very fast. I enjoy the building process a lot more than the optimizing part sometimes. And so for me, I tend to prefer languages and tools that allow me to do that quickly. So that's why I use Python and JavaScript. Is there a specific niche interest that you have or some sort of project that you're working on?
Do you think it is easier to do JavaScript if you already learned Java, or should you like is like that's so different, or it's like kind of same?
JavaScript are a bit different. Java is a very object-oriented programming language. So typically the way you run programs is using your main function, right? But I think that if you know Java, you can pick up JavaScript a lot easier than someone who doesn't know any programming languages. Because like honestly, like what I said a while ago, like I think once you learn one, you can sort of pick up the rest pretty fast. Because you're just really searching for the same sort of mental blocks or the sort of structures that you're using to construct your programs. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
What do you think about becoming a freelancer in IB? I think if you can be a freelancer, you should go do it, man. Like honestly. Like I think it's always good to have someone pay you to learn. Like I think that's the best. Like and I think as a freelancer, if you're able to get the jobs, then you should definitely give it a try. Um yeah. Like I think that's like the worst case is that you try something, it doesn't work out. You find that you don't like for example web scrapping, you find that you don't enjoy building websites. You can always experiment with other things. Yeah. Yeah, I think Mr. Jordan has a question.
Yes, please. Thank you. I was waiting for somebody to ask this question. At the very beginning, you were telling your story, and it went from I was looking at humanities, PPE, to I became a computer engineer.
Yeah.
When if you can, and this takes you back into what we have here as 16, 17, 18 year olds. uh, at that point, could you talk about your process? Would you mind talking about your process through applying to universities, what you went through, the conversations that you had
Mhm.
about different majors, how you came to choose the ones that you did, inevitably to uh, where you started this story? Do you mind?
100%. So I think for me, I wanted to study in Singapore because I didn't want to leave the country. So I only applied to Singaporean universities. So if you guys are applying to American universities, I don't really have very good like advice for that. Um, I can just talk a bit about why I chose my university. So the university that I went to was called Yale NUS College. It's been closed, so like I think they took their last class like last year, unfortunately. If not, this will be the part where I'll tell you guys to apply to the college. But the reason why I chose my university is because I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I really this was like when I just finished my A levels, and I did well, but I didn't feel like particularly interested in anything to the point where I was like, this might be what I want to spend my life doing. And I think it's really difficult to make a decision like that when you're that young because you don't have any experience other than like the books you've read, the limited like schooling life that you've had, at least for me back then. So I looked around the different universities, the options I had, And I realized there was this thing called liberal arts where you could delay the decision a bit longer for 2 more years. And so I was like, that sounds like a fantastic idea. And so that's what I did. I, I I chose to delay the decision for another 2 more years because I thought that it might be better to actually spend some time studying these subjects, looking at them, how they were like at the university level before I made my decision. And I think on hindsight, that was a fantastic decision for me because if I had never done that, I would never have become a computer scientist. I would honestly just have been a anthropologist or political science student. Because that's what I always thought I would do. I was a humanities guy from the start, right? And I think the only advice I would give is that you should just never be afraid to try it, to apply for things that scare you. You should always be exploring, talking to people, thinking about what's out there, and trying to see if this might be something you might be interested in. I think every single thing that I've accomplished in university, everything that I've managed to have, has really been because I've always applied for opportunities that I felt underqualified for, or just like have felt like just so out of my reach. So like applying to work in New York with just a intro to computer science, half an intro to computer science class under me as a software engineer, I was completely like underqualified for that. And every single time I applied for a position, I applied for something, I just I just thought that I just never wanted to be the one to say no to myself. If I was going to say no to myself, someone else was going to say that no to me. And it's really difficult to do that because when you get rejected, sometimes it sucks, right? But I think that just worked out a lot better for me. And I think that just, be curious about what's out there and just keep experimenting and trying. Yeah. I hope that helps a bit.
Thank you. That was perfect.
I have one more
Yeah.
question. So, did not taking com science in A levels like affects you when it comes to choosing com science universities?
Mhm.
Yeah, right.
Sorry,
Like,
I think my internet lagged out for a bit. I didn't hear your
oh
question.
yeah,
Sorry, could you
sorry.
repeat that?
So a lot of universities asking like maths HL, math HL for com science. So did like not taking com science in A levels like affect you in university, like when choosing one and like application and stuff?
For a computer science job, so I'm a computer science degree, so I'm not too sure about this. I applied for a liberal arts degree. So I can't give a lot of advice to that. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Wait, Venuja, I think you could ask him through his email because like we give all the emails like in the Ilmukila website. So,
Oh,
but I
okay,
think
okay.
we have to move on to the next session because we don't have much time. Okay, so yeah, thank you so much, Mr. Thank you so much, Avan. It was very insightful to hear your your experiences about software engineering and computer science, especially. So I think you guys could move on to your next session now. Here's the link tree again.